Chapter 1. The Mafia's Shadow Falls. The year was 1990, and I had just turned 17. That morning, the Poconos felt smaller than ever, like the hills themselves were closing in around our modest house. I sat at our worn kitchen table, the smell of strong coffee and bacon still hanging in the air from breakfast. Dad poured me a mug without asking, his hands steady the way they always were when trouble came knocking. Outside the window, gray clouds hung low over the same violent stretch of Pennsylvania hills where I had grown up. Race tensions had boiled over more than once in our corner of the Poconos, fights spilling into the streets, sirens cutting through the night. The kind of unrest the FBI kept quiet files on. I knew those streets too well. They had been my playground and my prison for as long as I could remember. The shadow had first fallen on me years earlier, back in 4th grade. I was maybe 9 or 10. My best friend's parents turned out to have ties to the Mafia. One ordinary afternoon, the FBI showed up at his house in unmarked cars. They sat us kids down at the dining room table and spread out black and white photos across the wood. "Do you recognize any of these men?" they asked. Some were just faces I might have seen around town. Others were crime scene shots. Murder photos so gruesome, my stomach twisted. Blood, bodies, things no kid should ever see. My friend leaned over and told me before we talked to them, "Don't say anything to them, Donnie. Not a word." I sat there frozen, heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I was in shock. I don't know if I opened my mouth or kept quiet. The agents waited. The pictures stared back at me. That day never left me. It was the first time I understood that the Mafia wasn't just something on the news. It was real, it was close, and it could swallow people whole. From that moment, the danger grew slowly, like water rising around your ankles. By the time I was 15, I had already gotten into a little trouble. Nothing big, just the kind of stupid kid stuff that happens when you're trying to outrun fear. I ran away more times than I can count, packing a small bag and disappearing into the woods or hitching rides, only to come back when the loneliness hit harder than the danger at home. Through all of it, I held on to the Boy Scouts for 9 solid years. Those weekly meetings and weekend camps were the one place where things made sense. Knots, maps, survival skills, a code I could actually follow. I was an altar boy too, serving at Mass in our little parish church. That path led me straight into something darker than I ever expected. I helped shut down a child abuse ring that had no business touching kids in our community. I didn't know how to talk about any of it back then without making everything worse. But those experiences taught me early that silence could be deadly, and that sometimes you had to speak up even when it scared you half to death. Some of my own cousins were in the mob. That blood connection quietly pulled my father and me into the informant life. We started feeding tips to law enforcement on low-level rackets. Extortion in local businesses hushed money drops in parking lots, whispers of hits that never quite happened. The 1986 commission trial and John Gotti's flashy rise had every family on edge. Informants were vanishing left and right. By 15 or 16, I was already deep in it. They'd send me to bug the places where my cousins and their crew met. "Sneak up and tape the wire under the table," they'd say. I'd slide underneath on my belly in the dark, hard hammering against the cold floor, press the tape down with shaking fingers, then crawl back out and act like nothing had happened. After every meet, I had to sweep the room for bugs they might have planted on us. Checking light fixtures under chairs, behind pictures, it was kid stuff to them. To me, it felt like walking a tightrope over a pit with no net. One wrong breath and the whole thing could drop. One ordinary afternoon, 1990, the rope finally snapped. My great-uncle found the plain white note that had been slipped under the front door. Just 2 words, "We know." He brought it straight inside, his face pale, and laid it on the kitchen table like it was a live grenade. Dad didn't even hesitate. He read it once, folded it carefully, and looked straight at me. "It's time, son," he said, a voice calm but final. "The Mafia's net is closing. We've done our part for years. Now we get you out before they tighten it any further." I swallowed hard. "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you," Dad said. "But first we make sure you're safe. The Marine Corps will give you a new identity, real training, and distance from all of this. Semper Fi will protect you." There was no time to argue. Within hours, I was given my family's survival gear. The same sturdy pack I had used on countless Boy Scout trips, now stuffed with extra clothes, a first aid kit, a small knife, water purification tablets, and the maps Dad had marked with safe routes. As I zipped the pack shut, I slipped one last thing into my wallet, a short poem I had written the night before in a quiet panic. It was only a few lines, but it was mine. Words about finding light in the dark, about roads that lead somewhere better. I folded it small and kept it there like a shield, something to hold on to when everything else felt like it was falling apart. With Dad's signature on the enlistment papers, I joined the Marine Corps at 17, the minimum age with parental consent. The recruiters didn't ask too many questions once Dad explained we needed to move fast. That same night, we loaded everything into our well-organized 1966 VW Fastback. It became our rolling sanctuary. We pinned maps to the dash, stacked canned goods in the back seat, hid a NASA-grade radio deep in the glove box for secure FBI contacts, and rigged the AM/FM as a backup recorder that could signal tribal police or anyone else if things went south. My great-uncle stood in the driveway as we pulled away, giving me one last nod. Dad drove the back roads under aliases, teaching me to spot tails in the rearview mirror. "Think like a spook, Don," he'd say quietly, eyes flicking between the road and the mirrors. "Stay calm. Stay invisible. That poem in your wallet? Keep it close. It'll remind you who you really are." In the quiet of those long night drives, with only the hum of the engine and the glow of the dash lights, Dad started feeding me scraps from his old bureau contacts. Loner sightings in the Southwest, chemical buys that matched residue from the Unabomber's devices. 12 bombs by then, including the 1985 Sacramento blast that tore apart computer store owner Hugh Scruton in a parking lot. We weren't official, just shadows on the edge of the hunt. But Dad saw real purpose in it. He'd grip the wheel a little tighter and mutter, "Scruton's family deserves answers, Donnie. Maybe one day this road leads somewhere bigger for you." By late summer, I shipped out to Camp Pendleton, California. 13 weeks of sand, sweat, rifle drills, and drill instructors barking orders turned a scared kid from the violent hills of the Poconos into a United States Marine. Between the obstacle courses and the night marches, I wrote Dad cryptic letters, never saying too much in case someone was watching. He answered with quiet updates on the hunt, always ending the same way. "Stay sharp. We're not done yet." The Mafia's shadow had pushed me into uniform, but something bigger was already pulling me forward. The open road, the secret recon, the cryptic radio calls, and the quiet promise that a boy who once taped wires under tables, sat frozen in front of murder photos, and carried a homemade poem in his wallet, might one day help bring real monsters to justice. I didn't know it then, but that road would eventually lead all the way to the NSA. For now, though, it was enough to know I was finally moving. Away from the cousins, away from the note under the door, and toward a future I could only see in pieces. Chapter 2. Into the Corps' Crucible. The summer of 1990 was a blur of dust, back roads, and the low hum of the Fastback's engine as I put the Poconos in my rearview mirror, alone. I was 17, fresh off the kitchen table decision, and the note my great-uncle had found. Dad had stayed behind to handle the final loose ends and keep watch from a distance. "You drive, son," he told me the night I left. "I'll be right here when you call." With his signature on the enlistment papers, I was gone, the Marine Corps promising a new identity and real distance from the cousins in their world. The well-organized 1966 VW Fastback was now my rolling sanctuary and my only companion. Maps pinned across the dash like battle plans, canned goods stacked neatly in the back, the NASA-grade radio hidden deep in the glove box for secure FBI contacts, and the AM/FM rigged as a backup recorder that could signal tribal police or anyone else if things went south. My family's survival gear rode in the trunk, the same sturdy pack from 9 years of Boy Scouts, now stuffed with extra clothes, a first aid kit, a small knife, water purification tablets, and the maps Dad had marked with safe routes. I drove under aliases, sticking to forgotten highways where the trees pressed close and the only eyes on me belonged to deer and hawks. Every mile I remembered Dad's quiet lessons from before I left. "Think like a spook, Don," he drilled into me. "Spot the tail before it spots you. Stay calm, stay invisible." I kept a short poem I had written folded tight in my wallet, the words about finding light in the dark pressed against my heart like a shield. When the nights got long and the fear crept in, I'd pull over, touch that paper, and remind myself why I was doing this. Not just running from the mafia, but towards something bigger. Payphone calls became our lifeline. Every few hundred miles, I'd find a lonely booth at a truck stop or a gas station, dial the number Dad had given me, and check in. "I'm clear," I'd say, voice low. He'd answer with the same steady calm. "Good. Eyes open. Any tales?" Then he'd slip me the first real scraps about the Unabomber. His old bureau contacts were already whispering. Loner sightings in the Southwest. Chemical buys that matched residue from the bombs. 12 devices by then. The 1985 Sacramento blast that killed computer store owner Hugh Scruton still fresh in the files. We weren't official, just shadows on the edge. But Dad saw purpose in it. Over the crackling line, he'd say, "Scruton's family deserves answers, son. Maybe this hunt is part of why the Corps called you now." I'd hang up heart pounding the same way it had when I was only 8 or 10. Right after the FBI sat us kids down and showed those murder photos, that was when they first had me bugging the tables, crawling under them in the dark, taping the wire with shaking fingers, then sweeping the room afterward for anything the cousins might have planted. It was kid stuff to them. To me, it felt like walking a tightrope over a pit with no net. The road was teaching me that some shadows you run from and some you chase, even when you're doing it alone. By late summer, I reached Camp Pendleton, California. The Pacific stretched out like a promise, but the real crucible was waiting inside the gates. 13 weeks of pure hell forged boys into Marines. Drill instructors with voices like gravel barked orders from dawn until the lights went out. "Move, Bugden! You're not dodging mafia bullets here!" Sand filled my boots on the obstacle course. My lanky frame burned through rifle drills. Others carried the weapons. I carried the weight in my head, and the endless team hikes left my legs shaking, but my spirit steady. Semper Fi sank deep, a creed of brotherhood that steadied me when the nights got dark and the old fears tried to creep back in. I compartmentalized everything. By day, I was just another recruit sweating through the grinder. By night, in the barracks, I'd lie awake thinking about the next payphone call. Between drills, I'd slip away to a booth outside the gate and dial Dad. "Yuma lead. Chemical buy, loner type," he'd say, voice low on the other end. I'd nod into the receiver, my Marine training already teaching me to lock away the civilian life. The fastback waited in a secure lot near base, our rolling ops center parked safe. But the mission never stopped. I wrote Dad cryptic letters when I could. Nothing that could be traced. And he answered with quiet updates on the hunt. The Unabomber's bombs were still ticking in the background, and Dad's old Army intelligence instincts turned every drifter whisper into something useful. Scruton's ghost pushes us, he'd say over the line. I felt it too. The Corps built me in ways I never expected. The obstacle courses tested the same survival skills I'd learned in Boy Scouts. The night patrols sharpened the same vigilance I'd used sweeping rooms for bugs when I was just a kid. And the brotherhood. The silent nods from guys who didn't know my story but had my back anyway. Reminded me I wasn't completely alone anymore. Still, I kept the poem in my wallet close. When the drill instructors screamed and the sand choked my lungs, those few lines grounded me. They reminded me of the boy who once sat frozen in front of murder photos at 8 or 10, the kid who crawled under tables with shaking hands, and the young Marine who was finally learning how to stand tall, even when the road ahead had to be walked alone. By the time I earned my eagle, globe, and anchor, the scared boy from the Poconos was gone. In his place stood a United States Marine ready for whatever came next. I called Dad from the payphone outside the gate the day I graduated. I made it, I told him. He was quiet for a second, then said, "Proud of you, son. The road's still calling, and the hunt's just getting started." The Mafia's shadow had pushed me into uniform, but the Corps had forged me into something stronger. I didn't know it yet, but those 13 weeks were only the beginning. The real crucible. The one that would blend Marine discipline with secret recon, fastback solo night runs with Unabomber leads, and a boy's poem with a man's mission, was waiting just down the highway. Got it, Donnie. Thank you for explaining this. I understand perfectly now. The characters in the book are composites drawn from real life. Your father in the story is a combination of all the men who helped raise you. The main character, the 17-year-old narrator who enlisted in the Marines, is a blend of you plus your two best friends who joined the Army, plus the other kid who was looking at the FBI photos with you, plus the friend whose parents took him in, both of whom you think became airborne. That's a smart way to tell the story. It lets the book feel deeply personal while protecting everyone and making the narrative stronger. We'll keep the main character as a Marine, exactly as you wanted for the story, but from now on, I'll quietly draw on those real Army/airborne details when it fits naturally. The discipline, the brotherhood, the pride in uniform, the way they carried themselves, etc. It will make the character richer without changing the Marine Corps path you like for the book. Chapter 2 is still good as written, with the fixes we already made. You alone in the fastback, Dad only on payphones, bugging at 8 to 10, etc. If you want me to tweak anything in Chapter 2 to better reflect the composite friends, maybe a quick line about the main character thinking about the guys I grew up with who took the Army route or something small, just say the word. Otherwise, we can leave it exactly as it is. Ready to move forward? Just reply with, "Good." Next I'll write Chapter 3, The Hitchhiker's Spark, right away, still 3 times longer, keeping the same style, no repetition, and now weaving in the composite character feel where it fits. Or change this part in the Chapter 2 first. Tell me exactly what you want adjusted. We're building this book the way you want it. One solid chapter at a time, using all the real pieces you're giving me. No rush. Let me know how you want to proceed, brother. Chapter 3, The Hitchhiker's Spark. November 1990 found me 17, a brand new Marine with the sand of Camp Pendleton still gritty in my boots, and the eagle, globe, and anchor pinned to my chest. Boot camp had ended, but the road hadn't. I was alone again in the 1966 VW Fastback, rolling west across the desert, after one last payphone call to Dad back in the Poconos. I'm clear, I told him, voice low in the booth outside the gate. Heading toward Arizona like we talked about. He answered the same steady way he always did. Eyes open, son. Scrutton's family still needs answers. Call when you can. Then he slipped me the latest scrap from his old bureau contacts. Another loner sighting, another chemical buy that matched the bomb residue. 12 devices by then. The 1985 Sacramento blast that killed Hugh Scrutton was never far from my mind. I drove under aliases. The fastback, my only steady companion. Maps pinned to the dash. Canned goods stacked in the back. NASA-grade radio hidden in the glove box. AM/FM rigged as a backup recorder. My family's survival gear rode in the trunk. The same pack I'd carried through 9 years of Boy Scouts. The short poem I'd written the night the note appeared was still folded tight in my wallet. The words about finding light in the dark pressed against my heart. Every mile I thought about the guys I'd grown up with. My 2 best friends who took the Army route. The other kid who sat beside me during that FBI interrogation in 4th grade, and the friend whose parents took him in. I knew both of them ended up airborne, jumping out of planes and carrying that same quiet discipline I was trying to build in the Corps. They weren't with me, but they were in the way I carried myself now, part of the composite strength that kept me moving when the desert felt too big and the Mafia shadow still whispered in the rear view. Highway 95 near Bullhead City, Arizona, was where the road changed. Blood orange dusk painted the sky as I crested a rise and saw a wiry silhouette thumbing for a ride. Tattered backpack, his black hair was like a grin that cut through the haze like a spark. I pulled over. He climbed in, smelling of desert dust and freedom, and introduced himself as Chris, Alexander's supertramp, when the mood struck him. His Datsun had drowned in a July flood, he said, and now he was chasing the wild with nothing but Thoreau in his pack and fire in his hazel eyes. Need a lift, kid? I asked, Marine grit still fresh in my tone. Chris, anywhere but here, he replied, settling into the passenger seat, like he'd been waiting for me his whole life. The AM/FM hummed Beatles' Norwegian Wood as we rolled. He pulled Walden from his pack and started quoting Thoreau like it was scripture. Society's a trap, man. Live deliberately. I smirked, thinking of the survival gear in my trunk and the poem in my wallet. Trap's got wheels, I shot back. At 17, I was still raw from boot camp. Obstacle courses that tested every survival skill I'd learned in the Scouts, rifle drills where others carried the weapons, while I carried the weight in my head, and Semper Fi brotherhood that felt a lot like the bond I'd had with the guys who joined the Army and went airborne. I hid that part of me, playing the drifter, but Chris saw something anyway. We ended up at Jan Burz's camp that night, a loose circle of rubber tramps and sun-baked dreamers parked along the river. Firelight danced on faces. Chris teased me right away. Rubber tramp, you're half in, half out. He shoved my shoulder like we'd known each other for years. I shoved back. You'll die chasing that book, Supertramp. Laughter cut sharp through the night, the kind of barracks banter I'd just left behind at Pendleton. Over the fire, he read Thoreau aloud, voice fierce. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately. I listened, thinking about the payphone calls I'd make later, the Unabomber leads his dad was feeding me, the cousins and the note and the FBI photos from when I was 8 or 10. Chris's fire stirred something deeper, a reminder that some roads were worth walking even when they scared you. Dad's voice crackled in my ear the next time I found a payphone. Hermit negative on the last lead, but eyes open, he said. I told him about the drifter I'd picked up. Boy's got fire, Dad replied. The same way he'd talk about the man who raised me, the composites of strength and silence that taught me to keep moving. Listen to him, son. Drifters see shadows we miss. I slipped Chris a jacket from my survival gear before we parted ways the next morning. His grin was a beacon in the Arizona dust. Scrutton's ghost pushes us, I thought, echoing Dad's words. I didn't carry weapons. Others did, per Corps protocol. But my mind was my weapon now, sharpened by Pendleton and the road. That meeting with Chris McCandless wasn't just a ride. It was a spark. A bond of words and roads and shared hunger for something beyond the traps we'd both known. I didn't know then how deep it would run, or how the Unabomber hunt and the Mafia shadow would weave through it. All I knew was that the fastback felt a little less lonely as I pointed it toward the next horizon. Poems still folded in my wallet, survival gear still packed tight, and the quiet promise that a kid who once bugged tables at 8 or 10 might one day help bring real monsters to justice. 1 mile, 1 payphone call, 1 unlikely friendship at a time.